Hello.
Hello, how you doing?
Oh, not so good. The situation here is getting worse. It's really dangerous. You know, it's rough here.
Oh God. So, how's the work? What are you gonna do?
I think the only thing I can do is leave. I got to get out of Crimea. I think that's the only thing I can do right now.
Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that.
All right. Well, yeah. I got to be going.
Okay, you call me as soon as you're out of there.
All right, I will.
Okay.
Bye.
You will. Bye.
Crimea. Today, it is known all over the world. On the front pages of famous publications and on the world's leading television networks, all now speak about this small peninsula. Why? Why is it important to know and understand what is happening in Crimea now? When disaster appears at someone else's doorstep, we tend to think that we will be unaffected, that it is happening somewhere far away and does not concern us. But tomorrow is a new day, and this disaster is already at our doorstep. This is why I, James, as a historian and researcher, want to tell the whole world about Crimea. It's crucial that everybody knows. Maybe its modern history will serve as a lesson. When Ukrainian and global media first began reporting about the arrival of unmarked military equipment and personnel in Crimea, I rushed to the peninsula as quickly as I could. But, alas, I would not be staying there for long. This video is dated February 26, 2014. And even though events were set into motion much earlier, February 26th became a new turning point in Crimea's history. When public outrage and the struggle for freedom, along with boundless cynicism and harsh persecution, came to the fore. Perhaps historians will one day mark February 26th as a day of resistance to the Russian occupation of Crimea, the day when more than 10,000 Crimean residents, most of whom were Crimean Tatars, gathered outside of the Supreme Council of Crimea.
Мы сказали, не назначайте сессию, не взрывайте ситуацию в Крыму, потому что уже вчера было понятно, что сессия назначается с одной целью, для того, чтобы сегодня предпринять действия, которые положат отторжение Крыма от Украины и присоединение к России.
Государство Украина, если оно не будет выступать угнетателем русских на сегодняшний день, и не будут дурные законы пытаться вносить русофобские, то у нас будет все нормально, все спокойно.
Unfortunately, the following events could not be prevented, only delayed for one day.
Дорогие крымчане, сегодня около 4 часов утра были захвачены вооруженными людьми, неизвестными пока, здания Совета министров Крыма и Верховного Совета Крыма.
But then they, these unidentified armed men, took over the airports and blocked Ukrainian military units and all strategic facilities. These unidentified armed men.
Посмотрите на постсоветское пространство. Полно формы, которая похожа на форму. Пойдите в магазин вот у нас и вы купите там любую форму.
Это были российские солдаты или нет?
Это были местные силы самообороны.
Принимали ли мы участие в подготовке сил самообороны?
Нет,
Крыма?
не принимали.
Не принимали.
Нет.
А как вы представляете себе будущее Крыма и рассматривается ли вариант его присоединения к России, московских мусульман?
Нет, мы не рассматриваем. И я вообще полагаю, что только граждане, проживающие на той или иной территории, в условиях свободы волеизъявления, в условиях безопасности могут и должны определять свое будущее. Мы ни в коем случае не будем провоцировать никого на такие решения. И ни в коем случае не будем подогревать такие настроения.
But as it turned out, there are no limits to cynicism.
Ситуация развернулась таким образом на Украине, что мы вынуждены начать работу по возврату Крыма в состав России. Потому что мы не можем бросить эту территорию и людей, которые там проживают, на произвол судьбы под каток националистов. Поставил определенные задачи, сказал, что и как мы должны делать.
On March 1st, the State Duma of the Russian Federation voted in favor of deploying troops to Crimea. Thus began the Russian occupation of Crimea. In early March, there were waves of protests across the peninsula. No one then still fully understood what awaited them. But anxiety over the future of their native peninsula and their children's safety drove many people into the streets. One of these protests was carried out by the one-man picketer, Reshat Ametov. He was taken away in a car, never to be heard from again. His body was found nearly 2 weeks later with signs of torture. His wife is now raising 3 children on her own. However, he is not the only victim of Russian aggression. Occupation forces also killed 2 Ukrainian soldiers. Their names are Stanislav Karachevsky and Sergei Kokurin. On March 6th, the Supreme Council of Crimea adopted a resolution to hold a general referendum on Crimea's political status on March 16th. Meanwhile, the protests continued and the anxiety continued to grow. Despite mass protests, and in defiance of the Constitution of Ukraine and all international legal norms, the referendum did take place. On March 18th, the Crimean Supreme Council issued a formal request to the Russian president for the peninsula's inclusion in the Russian Federation. From this day forward, Russia has seized control of all aspects of life in Crimea: the economy, education, infrastructure, finances, and communications. And now all Crimeans are greeted at the Simferopol airport by a display of flights departing only for one country. Many in Crimea have now come to understand that they are imprisoned, but their prison is very large. Indeed, it is the size of the Crimean Peninsula. May 3rd, the leaders of the Crimean Tatar people are banned from entering the peninsula. Around 5,000 Crimean Tatars gather at the administrative border. Mustafa Jamilov and Rafat Chubarov, chairman of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people, along with many activists of the Crimean Tatar national movement, are deprived of their motherland by the successors to those who had once tried to erase the Crimean Tatar people from the face of the earth. Similarly to February 26th, the 3rd of May has now become shorthand in Crimea for the criminal case resulting in the arrest of 5 Crimean Tatars. Moreover, about 200 people were ordered to pay fines of 10 to 40,000 rubles for administrative violations. May 18th. This is not simply a day of memorial for the Crimean Tatar people. This is the most tragic of all dates, one which has left a mark on every family a wound that has not yet healed after 72 years. Every year since the Crimean Tatars began returning en masse to their homeland, they have gathered on May 18th in the central square of the Crimean capital to commemorate the day of deportation. On May 18th, 2014, the first since the beginning of the occupation, the authorities attempted to deprive the Crimean Tatars of their collective memory. They were forbidden from holding their traditional gathering in the central square and were instead pointed toward the cemetery. In the end, under the watchful eye of special police forces, the people gathered instead in one of the compact Crimean Tatar settlements on the outskirts of Simferopol, Akhmechet. Under the open sky, Crimean Tatars again called upon each other to never forget. 1 year later, the gatherings were banned altogether, even in Akhmechet, and even in the cemetery. A similar situation occurred during the day of the Crimean Tatar flag, which had already become a traditional holiday. This year, the traditional dance known as the Haytarma was allowed only behind a newly installed fence after passing through metal detectors, and again under strict surveillance. The following year, on this day, the occupiers themselves raised the Crimean Tatar flag, but this was merely an empty gesture. Events in Crimea have proceeded in accordance with the best traditions of Russian social policy: interrogations, arrests, searches, and disappearances. 8 people were arrested in connection with the February 26th case alone. 3 of them are still in custody, and more than 150 people were summoned for questioning. When a Crimean Tatar hears a knock at the door at 5 in the morning and opens the door to find a man with a gun, an ingrained cultural memory tells him that his deportation is imminent. In the homes of Crimean Tatars all across Crimea, searches usually begin early in the morning. In some villages, 8 to 10 homes are searched simultaneously in so-called roundups.
Бежит на меня с оружием, наставляет на меня пистолет и говорит быстро к стенке.
Although people there dare not say it aloud, Crimea has become a peninsula of fear. During the first month of the occupation alone, human rights activists recorded more than 100 violations of the rights of journalists, including 38 physical attacks. Memory sticks and cameras were seized from their owners, and some people were even detained and held in cellars. In the 2 years since the beginning of the occupation, more than 20 people have disappeared in Crimea. Most of them are ordinary people who had never publicly expressed their political views. But people frequently go missing in the North Caucasus as well. It appears to be an intimidation tactic. Every Crimean Tatar now lives with the fear that it could happen to them at any time.
Ассаламу алейкум, Еміне ага. Ну, Еміне ага, в Крыму сейчас существует определенный фактор страха. С чем это связано? Какова цель такой политики?
Вообще, я думаю, что основная цель – это принцип «лояльность обязательно». В Российской Федерации, они сейчас Крым считают частью Российской Федерации, хотя мы с этим и не согласны, но тем не менее, по факту оно так. И если люди или группа людей, или организации, или даже целый народ не лояльны к существующей власти, они пытаются внедрить в него состояние страха. Легче держать людей, общество или целые народы в состоянии страха и в каком-то в таком вот паралитическом состоянии, чем обеспечивать его права и завоевывать его любовь. В Крыму сейчас не осталось больше организованных сил, кроме крымско-татарского народа.
Спасибо большое, спасибо огромное.
Удачи вам.
Удачи вам.
Nevertheless, I believe it is impossible to fully understand the whole tragedy of Crimea and the Crimean Tatars without looking closely at the history of their liberation movement. And in this struggle for the right to live in their homeland, there is one towering figure. His name is Mustafa Jamilov.
Мустафа Ага, скажите мне, пожалуйста, что для вас значит Крым?
У каждого народа есть земля своя, где родина. Мы в течение нескольких десятилетий после депортации крымские татары так отчаянно боролись за возвращение в Крым. Не потому, что там красиво, Черное море, горы. Мы, наверное, стремились бы туда, даже если бы там были полные степи, потому что там формировался наш народ, там могила наших предков. И вообще перспективы, дальнейшие перспективы существования и развития нашего народа только на своей земле. Так бы я сказал.
Спасибо. А как вы охарактеризовали бы национальное движение крымских татар?
Знаете, я очень горжусь своим национальным движением. В 1998 году, когда мне вручали премию Нансена, там было зачитано письмо тогда генерального секретаря ООН Кофи Аннана. Он говорил о том, что в мире очень много национальных проблем и, соответственно, очень много национальных движений. Но вот только национальное движение крымских татар за все десятилетия своего существования никогда не отклонялось от демократических путей и добилось определенных успехов. И в этом плане национальное движение крымских татар должно быть примером, образцом для всех национальных движений. Поэтому действительно мы гордимся тем, что, во-первых, национальным движением охвачен был практически весь наш народ, и гордимся тем, что за все эти годы мы не пролили ничьей крови. Исключительно демократическими путями добивались возвращения на свою родину.
Я поняла, что у меня есть песня. Это моя история. Это история моей семьи. От рассказов моей прабабушки Назылхан 18 мая 1944 года, когда она со своими маленькими детьми была депортирована из села Малореченское в Среднюю Азию. Как она потеряла свою дочь, и не было даже возможности ее похоронить. Только персональные истории, которые касаются тебя, только они могут тронуть.
When strangers are coming, they come to your house, they kill it all and say we're not guilty, not guilty. Where's your mind? Humanity cries. You think you're gods, but everyone dies. Don't swallow my soul, our souls.
In the past 2 years, since the Russian Federation annexed Crimea, it has violated 403 international and bilateral agreements with Ukraine. The tragic lesson here is that no matter how many fences you put up between yourself and your neighbor to delimit your respective territories on mutually agreed terms, in a moment of vulnerability, he may well break through the fence and into your home. This is what Crimeans experienced on February 27, 2014. And following this precedent, we may be the next to experience it ourselves. This is why everyone must be made aware of what is happening now in Crimea. Pablo Neruda once stated that Crimea is a medal on the chest of the earth, and the Crimean Tatars will not allow anyone to deprive them of this reward that they have struggled so long to reclaim. Crimea awaits a hopeful and prosperous future, and this depends on all of us. We have to work towards building it today, now.